All right. Well, Charis, thank you so much for joining us today. I got a little taste of it a few weeks ago when you and I talked and really wanted to hear more, but didn't want to deprive everybody else of all the great information you were sharing. Just the whole process and the outcomes are very exciting to me. And I think we've got a couple of the Team Hub members here in California who've shown up too, who are interested, as well as not just people from California, but people from other states and even another country. So I think we're excited to hear what you've got to share.
Great. Thank you so much, David. So yeah, I'm Charis. I'm the campaigns and communications lead for WEAll Scotland. I'm aware my accent is very Scottish, so I will try and speak slowly and hopefully you can understand me okay. But if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. So yeah, I'm campaigns and communications lead for WEAll Scotland. I've been doing this role for about 2 years now. Just over, and it's a fantastic hub to be part of. We've got 5 staff members here, which is great. And just thought I would start by setting the scene a little bit about Scotland. So, I don't know how much you know about the setup of the UK, but we have a central government in London, and then we have what's called devolved governments across the 4 nations. So we have a devolved government in Scotland, and they have power over certain decisions that are made here in Scotland, like some areas of welfare, the health system. So the NHS in Scotland is they're in charge of that, education and things like that. And we have our Scottish election happening in May next year. So one of our key priorities at the moment is how we can influence the manifestos of the different political parties for that election. So we started this process back in April and May this year, and we ran 2 in-person workshops in Glasgow, which is where I'm based, and joining you from tonight. And we gathered together, we invited our members and some of our friends from across Scotland to come together to form a manifesto together. And before we hosted that workshop, we were as a team, we came together to narrow down the process and make it as straightforward for people as possible. So we decided to base it around the 5 well-being economy needs. So that for us, what we've identified as that is dignity. So that's where everybody has enough to live with dignity. Nature, where we live within our natural resources. Fairness, so where we tackle inequality and everybody has fair income and wealth. Purpose, so that's where we put the purpose of institutions and government ahead of profit. And then participation, so people are included in the decisions that are made for them. And so we got people to, when we advertised the workshops, we got people to choose which of those areas they were most interested in. And then we put people into groups of those areas. And we started off by talking about what would it look like for everybody to be able to live with dignity in Scotland? What would it look like to live within our natural resources in Scotland? And what is within this powers of the Scottish Government in order to deliver on that? So what policy asks can we then come up with that the Scottish Government can actually deliver on? So they can't use the excuse of that's not up to us, that's up to UK government, because they like to do that wherever they can and pass the buck. And that was really, really interesting. We ran that workshop twice, so with 2 different groups of people, and it was really interesting to see the different policies that came out of those sessions. And what we asked people to do as well was then at the end, everybody was given the opportunity to vote on their top policy asks from each area as well. And that was how we narrowed it down. Because what we didn't want to do was produce a manifesto that was filled with lots and lots of asks. We narrowed it down to just being one ask under each of those 5 needs as well. So after that, we went away as a team and we gathered all of that feedback and we started to put together the manifesto. Thankfully, it was quite clear from the 2 workshops what the top policy choices were from most of those areas. Although there was a little bit of back and forth on nature in particular, and deciding between 2 asks. It was whether we give make it a human right, that people have a human right to access a safe environment, to access nature, or whether we give rights to nature itself. And that was where we kind of, there was a bit of back and forth, but we ended up deciding on giving rights, making it a human right to access nature, but then to progress it on to giving nature rights in time. So we kind of had a bit of a cop out on that one, that we got them both in there. And then, so yeah, we wrote them all up. Then we gathered people together again online and gave them one more chance for feedback. And we really gathered feedback on both the framing of how we talked about things, but also the detail of the policy ask within there as well. And then we took all that final feedback, finished the document, and we sent it around again and gathered logos, so people who were happy to endorse the manifesto and have their logo added to it. And we gathered quotes backing each of the different policy areas as well. So we approached, so for dignity, we approached the Poverty Alliance, who are a big charity in Scotland, very well known, and we got them to kind of give a quote of support for the policy ask under there. And before I go any further, I will talk you through what the 5 policy asks we came up with were as well. So the first one was to roll out a minimum income guarantee across Scotland. So what that means is that we have a level of income that nobody falls below, and that is made up from social security, so welfare benefits, paid work, where you get work that is actually paid properly, it's secure, it has good hours, and the third element is, just remember off the top of my head, stronger services. So having access to things like free transport or childcare being more affordable. What are the barriers to people accessing work? Things like that. So making sure, and care services as well were part of that. So that was under dignity. Then we had, under nature, we had enshrining an enforceable human right to a healthy natural environment in Scottish legislation. We had scaling up support for community wealth building and inclusive and democratic business models. So that's something that's within the power of the Scottish Government, looking at things like cooperatives or employee-owned businesses. How are we supporting them to do more, and how are we supporting the communities to actually reinvest wealth back into them? And then we had creating a new economic strategy for Scotland that is aligned with the wellbeing economy and guided by a citizens' assembly. We've had a citizens' assembly in Scotland before, but it wasn't given the power to do the job properly. So they came up with a whole load of great stuff, but then the Scottish Government didn't deliver on it because they weren't then held to account. So for us, it's really important that we engage in that more thoroughly, and we make sure that the Citizens' Assembly has the authority to actually ensure that the Scottish Government deliver on those things as well. And then finally, investing in multi-purpose spaces in every community in Scotland through a programme that is controlled and directed by local communities. So that's things like community hubs where people can come and get access to advice, or a local library, or all in one kind of place as well. And they can have ownership of that as well, and have choice over how they're investing the funds. It's something that we have seen happening in Scotland a bit, where particularly as the local authorities, so local council areas here, their budgets have been cut, so they haven't been able to afford to run things like libraries or swimming pool or things like that. So a lot of them are selling them to local communities or giving them to local communities to run for themselves. But then there's no support for the communities to then do that, and it's a very expensive process for the communities to try and take that up. So having better support in place for people and better investment in that is really central. And we also felt that was a really key point in tackling isolation in communities. Scotland has a large rural population. So a lot of the population within Scotland is very condensed across what we call the Central Belt. So that's Glasgow and Edinburgh. Then the large part of the land mass is the Highlands and Islands, where we have smaller communities and a lot of rural areas as well. So there's a lot of isolation. A lot of people are being forced out of their homes because there's a shortage of housing. and people buy second homes in those rural areas as well as like a holiday home or something. So how do we keep communities together and tackle some of the polarization that's we're seeing happening across society as well, hopefully in those community spaces. And so final thing, because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions, is the next steps for us now that we've published our manifesto, which I'll put the link to the manifesto in the chat as well. So we published the manifesto last week, so it's still very fresh, but we have an influencing plan. So we've identified a number of key politicians that we'll meet with over the next few months and share with them the manifesto and encourage across all the different political parties for them to engage with it and include some of those policy asks in their own manifestos. We have secured a meeting with the First Minister, so he's in charge of the whole of Scotland. He's coming to our office in 2 weeks' time to meet with us and to hear about the manifesto as well. And he's given us an hour and a half, which is unheard of to get that long. So we're very delighted with that. And then we've also done some work in the press and the media as well. So we've started to put it out. We will continue to do that across the social media platforms that we have. And yeah, just try and spread the word. And then we've also shared it with our members as well. So all those different members that have endorsed it have the manifesto, and we're encouraging them to share it in their meetings with politicians and potential candidates as well. So hopefully that wasn't too much
No,
information.
it's awesome. I mean, there's so much good information. I already have a lot of questions. I do encourage people. I put link to their website as well as their plan in there, and obviously Charis just put in the report. I think it's worth taking a look at. It's very beautifully designed, colorful, and so forth. So I'm going to defer my questions to other people, just those who haven't been here before. Just keep to one question at a time so we can get from questions from as many people as possible. And if you can keep it to a question as opposed to a manifesto, that would be awesome. And Charis, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we have a very different association of the word manifesto here in the US, which is why I avoided it in the promotion, because there's a couple people who have sullied that word for us, unfortunately. But nonetheless, so just go ahead and either raise your physical hand or your virtual hand. If no one's got questions, I'll start off. So, okay, I don't believe no one has a question. Kirsten, I knew I could count on you. So,
Sorry. Thank you. That was lovely. And I just wanted to know a little bit more about how you approached the elected officials and started to get them on board. Like, what was that process like? Can you explain a little bit about, did you start super locally, or did you kind of go all at once? And what was the response as you presented the ideas?
Yeah, great question. So we've existed in Scotland now as a hub for, I think, over 5 years. So we have gradually built relationships with different elected representatives over that time. We also have the advantage that our director, Aileen, is a former government minister. So she used to work in the Scottish Parliament and she headed up the portfolio for climate. So her party, the party she was part of, is still in government. So she has a lot of connections, which has been very helpful. So we have had a head start in that area. But we didn't want to engage with just one party. We wanted to make sure we were engaging with all of the political parties. So there's a few ways we've done that. We have what's called a cross-party group on wellbeing economy here in Scotland. So what that means is we have to have representatives from at least 3 parties to be able to run that cross-party group. And so that gives us a platform already. So that's a group that's open to MSPs, to politicians, but also to people working in policy as well. So yeah, that gave us a starting point. So we started off by reaching out to the MSPs who are in that cross-party group. And then we have gradually done engagement work, just building relationships with people in the Scottish Parliament where possible. And then in terms of tactics, we would look for the areas that they are interested in. So maybe start with it, not rather than going with all five policy asks straight away, maybe find the one that we think has the most resonance for them, and engage with them on that as well. And that seems to have worked quite well. Then people get interested because that's an area that they're passionate about as well. But it's not a quick process. I think it's definitely the long game of building up relationships
Yeah.
over time.
Oh, thank you. Linda.
Yeah, you sort of touched on what my question would be, but how long did it take from when you first all came together until getting up to the manifesto? I mean, how many? I'm sure it was more than a 1 year process.
We, we managed to do the manifesto in 6 months,
Whoa.
um, but it definitely was more work than we anticipated. Um, and we had a team working on it. So it was myself and my colleague Lucas, who's our policy and knowledge lead. We both work 4 days a week, so we had time to do this alongside other jobs that we were working on at the time. But yeah, it definitely took a lot more time. And part of the challenge for us was narrowing it down, and trying not to write too much as well. But yeah, and also I think the other challenge is working out how much engagement you want with people, how much collaboration, because the more you collaborate, the longer it will take. As well. So we had to be quite strict on where the opportunities were for people to feed in.
Yeah.
Now, does that 6 months include when the little groups got together to decide what thing to go after?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm impressed. That is really nice timing.
They're
I'm
smart
done now,
people.
David.
They're smart. Yeah, hi Hannah, I see your hand and I'll get to just 20 seconds. We are currently going through a similar process. Kirsten, Alex, and I, and some others in the group. So this is really helpful to us in forming what we're doing and maybe even changing the aims and aiming a little higher. So thank you, Charis. Hannah, it's all yours.
Hey, thank you. I'm wondering, have you all been thinking at all about supporting elderly or an increasingly aging population? Is that sort of on your mind as you were designing the manifesto, and how might it show up?
Yeah, absolutely. Care was a really key part of the discussions, particularly when we talked about dignity. So, like the we would call that care services in Scotland. I'm not sure what you would call it in the US, but yeah, it's a lot of care work in Scotland is unpaid. So even somebody who's gets social security payments for being a carer, they're a very small amount, and they're not allowed to work over a certain number of hours alongside that. So that really, really limits their income. So for us, the minimum income guarantee builds that into that approach, so that carers and the elderly population are included in that policy ask of making sure that nobody's income falls below a certain level and that everybody has access to public services that they need as well.
That answer your question, Hannah, or is there? Okay, great.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
terrific. Anybody else got a question? Laura.
Hi, can you talk a little bit about the inequality and how you're addressing that, and what is the situation, what's your evaluation of the level of inequality in Scotland? I know here it's a huge problem and just getting worse and causing all kinds of other issues for us.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just getting up the right bit in the document. So that came under fairness for us, tackling inequality. It's a massive problem in Scotland. We have 1 in 4 children growing up in poverty here. So it is a big problem. Now, in Scotland, it's not as bad as the rest of the UK. So in the rest of the UK, they have a higher rate of children growing up in poverty. It's 1 in 3. Whereas in Scotland, we have 1 in 4, which is still bad. but the Scottish Government have added extra mitigations for so it's extra social security payments that happen in Scotland that don't happen in the rest of the UK, which is amazing. So we have something called the Scottish Child Payment. So that goes to families where they are on a qualifying benefit already. So if they're already a low income household, they get an extra payment of £27 a week per child, as well as part of the Scottish Child Payment. So there are measures happening in Scotland, but the richest 10% of households in Scotland own 10 times more wealth than the poorest 40% of households. So it's definitely a big problem. And part of how we tried to tackle that in our manifesto was having that policy ask for increasing support for community wealth building, so making sure that wealth is going back into the communities. But we also included at the end of the manifesto how to pay for this. How do we pay for this manifesto and the policy ask that we are including? And so we included in that a range of tax recommendations. And we are part of a network in Scotland called Tax Justice Scotland, and really looking at what would it look like to have better wealth tax. We have a very outdated property tax in Scotland. It's called council tax, which is based on house values from 1991. So it's very old and outdated and penalises people in poverty. So thinking about how do we redesign that. And we're actually about to start, or we've just started a project called Sharing Our Wealth, which is all about looking at taxation, and we're going to do some polling on public attitudes towards more progressive taxation as part of that.
That's great. Yeah, and that was a question I was sitting on, and one that we're grappling with here in California. Someone is introducing a ballot measure next year to put a one-time wealth tax on billionaires. So that'll be interesting to see if that gets on the ballot and how it's received. Any other questions from other people? Jay, I know you said you've got to head out soon. Did you have one before you head out, or? And no pressure if you don't. So
Yeah, no, I've just appreciated listening in, and yeah, I'm gonna have to jump in a few minutes, but thank you so much for coordinating this.
all right, we'll see you soon. So I have a couple questions. I'll ask until someone else brings up theirs. You had talked about the 5 needs, and I was curious when those were formed. Were those formed during the Glasgow sessions, or were those formed beforehand? And if so, how were those settled on? I mean, I think they're fabulous. I just would love to know more about how those were created.
Yes, absolutely. So those pre-exist the manifesto work. So that was they were formulated back in 2022. So we gathered together a similar process of gathering together people. It was before my time, so I wasn't part of that. But yeah, we gathered people together and really looked at what would it look like to have a well-being economy. What is the key things that the economy should deliver on? And so we boiled it down to those 5 needs. We have a Wellbeing Economy 101 session that we run with members, or just open for anybody, where we go into that in more detail and we talk about the 5 needs, and then actually how you go about then delivering on that. What does that look like in practice as well? And Lucas is brilliant at talking through that a bit more. But yeah, we gathered people together, and then what we did was we produced a joint statement, and we sent that around, and we gathered support for that, and we got over 100 charities, economists, businesses, trade unions, and academics that backed that joint statement and vision for a wellbeing economy. And then we sent it to the First Minister at the time as well. We've had a lot of political change in Scotland within this parliamentary term. So we are on our 3rd First Minister within the last 5 years. So it was a previous First Minister. There's been a lot of change within the political parties.
Sure.
And that has really impacted the wellbeing economy agenda in Scotland as well. So Nicola Sturgeon, who was our First Minister for 16 years, when she was a big champion of wellbeing economy, and she did a TED talk on it, which was brilliant. And then she decided to step down and to retire as leader. And her predecessor only lasted a year. And he was also supportive of a wellbeing economy, but he did not have a good experience as First Minister and didn't have much popularity. And so therefore it was almost too associated with them. So then we lost support for wellbeing economy when when John Swinney came into power. So that will be part of our conversation with him in a couple of weeks' time, is getting Scotland back on track within the wellbeing economy movement.
Well, we wish the team very good luck on that conversation. So
yeah,
I'll take a quick pause to see if anyone else has a question. So, Alex.
If you could speak a little bit about community wealth building and how that, that like community wealth building is, I think in Scotland actually has a government post, which has been really interesting to see. That's kind of like my speed there. I studied community wealth building. So I'm wondering, like, what's the interaction between that movement and the well-being economy, and specifically the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so we would always describe the wellbeing economy as a picnic blanket approach. And so within that, there's a number of different things. Community wealth building is one of those, or donut economics, or circular economy. These are all part of a wellbeing economy. So for us, it's quite a central thing. We have some really great organisations in Scotland leading the work really on community wealth building. So we tend to lend support to that rather than being the ones that lead on it ourselves. We have just had a community wealth building bill passed in Parliament, which is great. But I think it's for us, it's very similar to a lot of things in Scotland. The talk around it is great, but it lacks action. We don't see action often, actually delivering it and investing in it. So we have Scottish Enterprise, which is a government-run agency that looks after businesses in Scotland. They have hundreds of staff, and two of them have been put in place to support alternative business models, which would include that kind of community wealth building side of things. So it's very low investment, really on a practical level, that's going into that. Having said that, we have some great examples of community wealth building in action. So just last week, I was at a conference hearing about community energy and the role of wind farms, which is really great resource that we have in Scotland. We have quite a lot of wind, being an island, and we have a lot of islands off the coast of Scotland as well. So one of those wind farms runs across several islands along the west coast of Scotland. They've been running for 10 years. They're very small islands, but they have generated £22 million, which has been invested back into the community and opened up shops and library and cafe and things for the local community. So there's some very great examples of it happening. We just need to see more.
That's great. Hopefully they're all around a golf course, if anyone knows what I'm referring to. So, Kirsten, I saw your hand. Just want to make sure if there's anyone else who hasn't had a chance yet. Okay, go for it.
Great. What's the status? I loved how you kind of included both priorities in your nature category. What is the rights of nature status for you in Scotland right now? And like, how is that going? And how difficult is that to move that forward, or easy?
Not easy. Yeah, so it was a really difficult decision which way to go with that, and how radical to be, to get the right balance of being radical, but also people being able to support it. We felt that just people in Scotland weren't ready yet for that giving right to nature approach. But yeah, I think climate in general, nature is a tricky area. We have climate targets that have been set by the Scottish Government, and they are built into legislation. So legally, they are supposed to be delivering on those. But all of the latest research and reporting on it shows that we're not on track to meet those targets, and that's very classic of what happens here. We set very ambitious targets for poverty and climate, but then we don't do the action to reach those targets. I think in general, there's good support for action on climate. We have a number of mass rallies that happen in that area, with the next one happening on the 15th of November as well. So people do come out in support of it. And I think we see very much, because there's so much rural land in Scotland, it is definitely something that people are passionate about, but it is also very divided because we also have North Sea oil, and that is a big industry in Scotland. So how we do a just transition out of fossil fuels and into clean energy is a really key area. For us, we have a Just Transition Commission, which is an independent body that holds the government to account on how we are doing that transition in a way that brings people with us and makes sure that, particularly for the east of Scotland and for Shetland, which is one of the big islands off the north of Scotland, and that's predominantly where a lot of the oil industry is based. So make sure that we're looking at how can make people still have jobs, how are people being retrained and given the right skills, and how are we doing it in a way that's good for both people and planet. I don't think we always get that right, but it's good that we're at least looking at it. And energy is something that is not, it's complicated policy area for Scotland because it covers both. The UK have some power in that, and Scotland has some power, so we don't have full control over energy or climate, really.
I love how well thought out it is. And, you sort of tapped into two things that I want to ask about. One is, you said fairly early on something about and it wasn't that I didn't understand you, I just didn't catch it, about what the politicians were using as their excuse for why these things took on. Would you state that again and maybe also expand on it a little bit?
Yeah, so that's due to us being devolved government. So as a devolved government, we have certain areas that we are responsible for, and some areas we have full responsibility for. So health and the NHS, we have full power over that in Scotland and with the Scottish Government. But some areas are reserved, and that has full power as to the UK government. So they're very much dependent on what the UK government decide, and that dictates what happens in Scotland. And then some areas cross both, and that's where it gets very confusing. So things like social security, benefit payments, that crosses both UK and Scottish government. And when that happens, what it means is the Scottish government cannot make a decision on social security without the permission of the UK government. So they have to get their agreement first before they can roll out. So Scottish Child Payment, as an example of that, they had to get permission from the UK government before they could roll that out in Scotland. They couldn't just do that themselves. And then the other kind of key limitation is the UK government sets the budget. So they decide how much money Scotland has, and we have no borrowing power. So we are limited to the budget that they give us. We have very limited taxation powers. So there's some things that we can do in Scotland to generate more income, particularly council tax, which is the one I mentioned earlier. That's property tax. And there is some wealth tax that we could do, but we can't do full wealth tax in Scotland. We don't have the power to do that. So what happens then is the Scottish government, if they are being held to account on something, they'll say, well, it's not our fault, it's the UK government's fault because they haven't given us the budget to do it. Or they, and it becomes a blame game because then the UK government will say, well, we've given you lots of money and we gave you extra money this year, so why haven't you done that? Without acknowledging inflation or complexity or the extra things that Scottish government deliver on to mitigate for some of the things that UK government do. So it can become quite a blame game. So that's where we have to kind of tread quite a tight line of we will only try and influence what they can actually deliver on.
Thank you for explaining that. Anyone else? I could keep going, but I just want to share the time. So I keep going, I shall. So let's stay on tax. One of the concerns that rolls around a lot is that people are moving their businesses or corporations or doing shell games internationally and so forth. And so you talked about a group that had supported two different groups that were supporting on tax policy. Um, and just wondering whether any of that discussion centers around some of these movements that wealthy people do or corporations do for tax avoidance, evasion, whatever the right appropriate term is, and any advice for us here. So,
Yeah, so yeah, a couple of things I would say on that. So I guess one thing to set the scene in the UK is a lot of the wealth here is asset rich. People are asset rich. It's generational wealth. It's these estates and big areas of land that have been passed from generation to generation. So when we are talking about wealth tax, taxing the income from those assets, that's not something they can just pick up and move. Those are stuck here. So one of the most wealthy people in the UK owns half of Mayfair. That's a very expensive part of London. They can't just pick that up and move it. So being able to tax that is key, and it's looking for those kind of opportunities within it. We also have something very interesting happening here in the UK at the moment. I don't know if you've seen any coverage of it, but we have a politician that's just rising up called Zach Palensky. He is the new leader of the Green Party here in the UK. Now it's slightly complicated in that he's leader for Greens in England and Wales and Scotland. We have a separate Green Party. They are the same party, but they believe in independence. So that would be Scotland becoming independent from the UK. And so they have two parties. But Zach, very much like Zandani, is very much growing in popularity. He's building a movement. The membership of the Green Party has now overtaken the Labour Party, who are in power here. And he is going out there and he's talking about tax. He's talking about taxing wealth. He's talking about inequality and he's talking about a progressive agenda. And it's really tapping into the left where people are feeling disillusioned and ignored. We have technically a left government here in the UK, but they have been acting more like a conservative government and that kind of right-wing government. So people are really drawn to that. So I think it'd be a watch this space for tax, and that kind of conversation I think is going to be very interesting over the next little while.
oh wow, thank you. That exceeded my expectations. Thank you. Again, quick pause to check, see if anyone else has something. Okay, how about this? Raise your hand when you've got something. Otherwise, I'll keep going until I exhaust the conversation. So another thing we're particularly interested in is involving the community, and you talked about it in two different aspects. One, in terms of the two Glasgow events where people came and gave their input in building up, and then also, I'm not sure under which of the five needs it was, probably under participation, about community centers and them getting to decide what those community centers look like and so forth. So curious about both of those. How many people showed up for the Glasgow events? How long were they? What sort of design did you use? So let's focus on that one first.
Yes. So we had a space that was limited to a maximum of 40 people at a time. Glasgow University have spaces that you can hire for free if you're a charity, so that we took advantage of that. So we had about 30 people, I think, 35 maybe, at both sessions. We ran them both on the same day. We ran one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and we kept it to 2 hours maximum. We wanted to make sure that most of the time was spent in conversation. So there was only a very short 10 minutes at the start to kind of set the scene, to set expectations, to remind people of what the five needs were or are, and to kind of set it up the rest of the time. And then we spent an hour and a half in small groups. So we had up to 6 people in each small group. Talking about those five needs, and we had a number of set questions. So first of all, we got people to think big, like what would it look like for everybody to live with dignity? What would it look like to have a safe and natural world? What would it look like to have more fairness across society? And then we moved on to, well, what's stopping us from being there? What are the key barriers to that happening right now? And then we went to what are the policies that we need to see that are within the power of the Scottish Government? What are the policies that we want to see to tackle those problems and to facilitate the answer to the first question, to make that possible? And that came up with a whole host of policies under each one. And then we got the groups to narrow it down to three, which they then presented back to the wider group, and everybody got to hear those top three. And then in the last 10 minutes, we gave people stickers and they went round and voted on each of the, they got one vote on each of the five needs. So they could vote for what
Sounds
policy.
like awesome events, and great outcomes too. How were people invited or selected to join? Was it just advertising and whoever responded, or were people targeted, or?
We prioritised our members. So we started off with members first. So in Scotland, we have just over 100 members. Actually, I think we're at 150 now.
Congratulations.
So yeah, we started with members, and we gave them a kind of window of time to book in before we opened it up any wider. So we sent out 2 emails in that time. The first one kind of launching it, the second one as a reminder to kind of book their space before we opened it to the general public. And then we opened it more widely. So we shared it on social media, we shared it out to our general email list. But we also sent it to key people. We did some direct invite as well. So if there was people that we thought would be really good to make sure we have them in the room. So we wanted to make sure we had a range of people, from poverty campaigners to people working in climate to people who are working maybe in gender inequality charities, the care sector, the housing sector, advice sector as well. So people that are working in kind of giving advice on housing or social security, and academics as well, and economists. So it's quite a mix of people that we had in the room from quite a wide variety of spaces, which was very interesting to see.
Yeah, sounds like a great process. Kirsten, go for it.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, that's great that you had such a wide kind of group of people from all sectors. And I assume some of those were, community-based organizations that, are doing the work on the ground. Did you engage journal? I think you mentioned at one point you had been talking to the media, or there was an opportunity to get the news involved. How did that come into play? Was that part of getting the word out about these workshops, or was it later in the process? And how did that go for you?
Yeah, great. So we had 2 key moments with the media. And we have a specific media in in Scotland called Third Force News. And that is a publication that's for the third sector, and has quite a big readership across the third sector and the charity sector in Scotland. We decided to very deliberately target them rather than going out with a general press release, because that's the audience we were wanting to engage with, was people who are campaigning, that are already in this space, that are already kind of thinking about the manifestos and thinking about what policies they want to be influencing. So I wrote a comment piece, like an op-ed, does that make sense? Yeah, that kind of reflective type piece back in June, just after we did the first round of workshops, and kind of wrote my reflections of being in the room, how it kind of filled me with hope and when things can feel very bleak, as well, and talked about that as then going away and writing up the manifesto and had that sense of hope for change. And then I did a follow-up piece, which actually I can put the link to that in the chat as well. So I did that last week, launching the manifesto. And again, that's that kind of opinion piece. It's the going into a bit more of the being able to speak more freely than you can in a general press release. We did think about doing a general press release, but because everybody's doing their manifestos right now, the media aren't that interested in another organisation doing one. So we decided to go with this approach. It's also partly because I'm actually finishing up at WEAll Scotland, so I'm due to finish in 3 weeks' time, and my capacity is then very limited. So it takes a lot of time to do a big press campaign. So we decided to go with quite a targeted approach for this one. And then this will go on their website, and then sometimes they will put that into a magazine that they produce as well. So that will go out to across the third sector. And for us, the real call to action then is for people to engage with our work, whether they want to become a member afterwards or whether they will go and back the manifesto as well.
Mm.
Thank you. Wonderful. Great, great results.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we go for final questions, or anything that you feel like no, you feel you got most of it out?
Yeah, I mean, I would just encourage you in what you're doing. Like, it's amazing. I know it's a really hard environment often to be working in, and we all see the news and what's happening in the world. But I think when we see the wins, it's so encouraging, isn't it? And seeing the New York elections has been a great
Yeah.
boost, I think, this week as well. And so, yeah, just keep going even on the hard days.
Yeah. Um, and so I think my last question is, you talked about a plan for reaching out to politicians and interacting, meeting with them and producing it. How much effort is being put into just general public education about these concepts, about the five needs, about well-being policies, and is it important to get those politicians to move from verbal agreement into actual action to get some threshold of public support? And or is that not a primary part of the focus?
Yeah, so our key strategy in Scotland has three strands to it. So, firstly, grow the movement, then collaborate with others, and thirdly, change the narrative. So,
Great.
three quite big
Yeah,
aims
no,
we
those
have.
that those are great. Yeah,
But we really recognise the importance of growing public support
yeah.
for wellbeing economy agenda, because that's what's going to put the pressure on politicians to act and to hold them to account. So a lot of my job is thinking about narratives, thinking about framing, thinking about how we communicate this in a way that is accessible. Because we know from the research done that when we talk about the economy, people think it's this mysterious thing that's off there, it's this kind of fixed thing that can't be changed. So, how do we develop the narratives and the tools to be able to
Mm,
cut through that and to show people that it can be changed? So, we have a couple of things we've done on that. We've just started using a new slogan called Changing the Rules of Our Economy, and to kind of really show that that is something that is possible, and to champion that. And then we're also doing that through projects. So I mentioned that we've got a Sharing Our Wealth project. We've also got another project that we are in the process of starting off, called Our Homes, Our Economy. And the idea of that is really to look at how do we relate the economy to everyday lives? How do we show people that it's the system that's the problem? We have a housing crisis here in Scotland. Even our Scottish Government have declared a housing emergency because there are not enough homes. We've got people stuck in temporary accommodation for 2 years, waiting to get a home. And there just isn't enough homes. So the project will be working with people and communities to co-create solutions, to examine the housing crisis. How is it affecting them? How do we create solutions that change the system? And then how do we develop the narratives to be able to talk about housing as a systemic issue and not just a kind of downstream fixing? Yeah,
You're
yeah.
you're quite good at this. And so I'm sorry to see that you're moving into a slightly different sector, but I know you'll still be contributing and effective. But so I hope you don't mind that we copy some of your work and you take it as flattery as opposed to stealing from you, because it's really, I like some of the framing you're doing, the five needs. I like the three prongs of growing the movement and awareness, and so a lot of this is really terrific stuff, and I'm grateful you took some time to share it all with us today. Any last question from someone else before we wrap up? Laura.
Sorry, I have to take myself off mute.
Yeah, you're the
Yeah, no,
only
thank you.
Laura here today. So
That's good.
we have another group with another Laura B. So
Yeah, so thank you so much for your presentation today. I found it very informative and very well organized. And congratulations on everything you're doing. My question is sort of piggybacking on what we were just talking about on what the narrative is. And I guess it's in general is how do you explain all of this to people to help bring them on board? What are the things that you emphasize? What are the things that you avoid, if particular terminology and such? So I guess maybe the question in a short amount of time is if you only had 1 to 2 minutes with a person who has no idea about what you're doing, how would you explain it to them? In a way to get them on board with what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean it's a challenge. So I think there's a few things I would do. So I would start off with just a very simple, a well-being economy delivers good lives for all on a healthy planet. Keeping it simple for people. I think the more that we can avoid any jargon or technical language, the better. And that's a constant battle between me and Lucas, who's the policy lead, because he wants to make sure we're not watering it down. But how do we make it accessible? I say battle, we get on very well, a friendly battle. So yeah, thinking that through. And then I use the five needs. I think those are really, really effective for people and being able to talk about this is what our economy should do, but right now it's not. And it doesn't have to be this way. I think that's one of the lines we use a lot is it doesn't have to be this way. It can be different. The other tactic that we use is starting to question the current system. This constant focus on growth and economic growth, we now just throw in that question, but what are we growing and at what cost?
Mm.
And kind of putting it back to people of that growth isn't always good. We know that across variety. We're growing inequality, we're deepening levels of poverty, we're exacerbating the climate crisis. So being able to link growth with negative associations as well, I think, is really key. So yeah, those would be my main things that I would go with.
Right. Sometimes you have a growth on your arm, you have to get burned off at the doctor. That's not a
Yeah.
good kind of growth. So, all right. Well, let's just hear it for Charis and all the hard work she's put in getting to this point and for taking time. And thank you so much. This is really, really helpful to our work. And so I'm grateful for your time.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to join you all.